This One's Wife, The Great Reconciliation. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. We know that this one's wife uses people because she's a narcissist. Her father paid for her education, treated her like a princess, supported her. He got her opportunities in the acting world. He shouldered the burden when her mother disappeared for a number of years. I've explained to you that this was driven by his own narcissism, but nevertheless, he did good things for his daughter, which were instrumental also in the creation of her narcissism. But the fact is that viewed as to what he did for her, you would think that she would be appreciative of it. And of course, because she's a narcissist, she isn't, because she expects that all of these things ought to be done for her. She has that sense of entitlement, that because she truly believes that she's a princess in the centre of the universe, that all of these things should be done to her as a matter of basic level, that they come as standard, that you're my dad, you should be doing these things for me. And yet, notwithstanding everything that he did for her, he finds himself disengaged from, not just put back on the shelf, which is usually the fate of non-intimate secondary sources, but cut off from her. Notwithstanding the fact that he suffers from ill health, she has nothing to do with him. The reason being, it is easier to control him by having nothing to do with him, and he served his purpose. She'd moved on to a different stratum, and in so doing, could conveniently leave him behind. Because she has no emotional empathy, she doesn't love her father, although she believes that she does. Her actions prove that she doesn't. The fact that she has nothing to do with a man that supported her to such an extent, and that she has nothing to do with the man who has been suffering ill health, demonstrates that she doesn't love him. She, of course, believes that she does, because her narcissism tells her that. Her narcissism tells her that she's a victim of his behaviour, that he was out seeking paparazzi shots before her wedding, and that was an odious thing to do, and probably has also caused her to revise history to such an extent that she said some rather unpleasant things about his behaviour towards her as a child. Probably that which has meant that Harry has swallowed hook, line and sinker these tales, and therefore he's not bothered about having a relationship with her father either. She's done the same to her half-siblings. Whilst they may not have enjoyed the closest of relationships because of the age gap, they nevertheless were in the same family. They too have been disengaged from. With them, it's more a case of them being difficult to control head on. Her narcissism regards them as problematic because they repeatedly point out her poor behaviours and talk about them. There's less that she could obtain from them in terms of usefulness compared to her father. And again, because the narcissism recognises that they are problematic, rather than just leave them on the shelf, she is disengaged from them too. Thus, she has cut off 3 members of her family. We also know that extended members of her family, both on the Markle and Raglan side, have been left well alone. She did nothing in relation to the death of one of her uncles. We've seen, of course, member of the Raglan clan, who had all got together for the purposes of her birthday, put on their Sunday best, etc., and basically were ignored because they don't matter to her, because the only person that matters is her. But it doesn't end there. Notwithstanding the fact that he walked her down the aisle and was a stand-in for her father, she has snubbed King Charles. Similarly, Prince William and Princess Kate have been snubbed. They have been put to one side because they are viewed as treacherous and traitorous by this one's wife's narcissism. This has also meant that the various cousins have no interaction with one another, that because of the way that her narcissism works, she has disengaged from her in-laws and her own family, meaning that her own children, to the extent that they are believed to exist, do not have anything to do with a grandfather, another grandfather, a step-grandmother, uncles, aunties, and cousins on either side of the family. Many children can be very close to their cousins. They grow up almost having them like brothers and sisters. There are family occasions where everybody gets together, which creates memories and anecdotes which are told for years to come about the songs that Uncle always sang at Christmas, how Auntie got up and danced on the table, whatever it might be. All of these are being denied to her children because her narcissism dictates that there is the necessity of having nothing to do with these family members. And thus, it does so trampling over the rights, expectations, hopes and delights of those children because they simply do not matter. Because she has no emotional empathy for them, what they might get out of having a relationship becomes subsumed beneath her own interests. Thus you might think, well, this is a very sad state of affairs and an entrenched one. But here is the rub, as Hamlet might say. All of that could change in an instant, and there could be the great reconciliation. If her narcissism dictates that it would be appropriate for her to have a relationship with King Charles and Queen Camilla, then it would direct her to do so. She would drop the demands for an apology. She would come and bring the children and say, I'm sorry that things haven't worked out before, but let's have a new start. Notwithstanding the fact that she'd be engaging with two narcissists, they would see the advantage of such contrition, false as it is, in enabling their facade to look good by welcoming her back into the fold, because she has been apparently contrite. I believe that she would get short shrift from William and Kate, but nevertheless, they may well attend family events purely to appease the desires of King Charles, not to be seen to be awkward. And thus, reconciliation, whilst not a joyous mwah, kissy, hugs all around affair, could actually occur. Similarly, she could swoop in like the angel of mercy to go and see her ailing father, to explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd been under great stress as a consequence of her new role, that she had been ill-advised by people, that they had fed her lies about his conduct, and it is only just recently that she realised that was the case, and how can you ever forgive me? Notice, there is no actual mea culpa in all of that. It is blame shifting, stating that it's other people who are at fault for her failure to involve herself with them. Similarly, she could walk back in and greet Samantha and Thomas Markle Jr. like long-lost half-siblings. Whatever has gone before, let us forget that and have a new start. They probably choke on their pretzels as a consequence of her issuing such utterances. But this is the brass neck of the narcissist, that because of compartmentalization, essentially that which has gone on before, her narcissism would delete, save to the extent that it would need to be mentioned for the purpose of explaining why she behaved as she did. In some instances, she could just breeze back in, making a surprise visit, and not explaining herself, because after all, with her sense of entitlement, why should she explain herself? It might only be if people ask questions, why are you here now? That the narcissism would then feel compelled to issue an explanation to nullify that threat to control posed by the question of, why are you here now? She could just return at an instance because the narcissism decrees that it is appropriate to do so. It might be, for instance, that the facade needs bolstering. It might be, for instance, that she needs to leverage publicity off this, and therefore it enables a greater level of control. Conversely, it may never happen. There may be no great reconciliation because the narcissism sees no worth in it happening. That the narcissism deems that there is nothing to be gained by having an involvement with them and more to be maintained by having nothing to do with them. Easier to control them, fewer challenges and threats to control, and that there's nothing they're going to offer, for instance money, therefore why bother with them? Thus, the status quo of alienation may well continue forever. But by the same token, it can change in an instant. And sometimes this happens because The narcissist is not bound by the normal rules and conventions that govern relationships. She's allowed to do what she wants on the basis of what her narcissism requires. And if that suddenly means making friends and being all lovey-dovey to either the in-laws and or her own family, then the narcissism dictates it must be so. It will happen. And of course, everybody else watching would think, what an absolute brass neck this woman has. What an absolute cheek she has. But remember, her narcissism will convince her that what she's doing is right, appropriate, and fair. And that anybody who says to the contrary just doesn't want her and her family to be happy. The problem is, her father would be likely to accept it because his own narcissism would deem that it would be appropriate for facade management. Her siblings may be a little cooler about it, but again, for the sake of their father, they may well go along with the reconciliation. Ditto on the Windsor side of the equation. Charles and Camilla would utilise it for facade's appearance, but William and Kate and Anne and Sophie would be less than impressed and would want to keep their distance, perhaps only under protest, having some involvement just to ensure that King Charles is kept happy. There's nothing to suggest that there will be any great reconciliation anytime soon, but it provides me with a useful opportunity to explain to you the reasons why she has no involvement with them, but how that could suddenly change in an instant, and how she doesn't have any sense of guilt, any sense of remorse about having had nothing to do with them, and how once again any great reconciliation that would occur would be entirely self-serving. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.